Hey friends, welcome to the wood shop. It's your old friend Mr. Kern here. I've got a big stack of drawers that I'm gonna have to build, and I'm using this sweet poor cable dovetail jig. And I said to myself, boy, I should make a video about how to use that. So just to familiarize you, there's a pretty good shot. Those are dovetails. Back in the olden days when they built stuff, they'd have real wide drawers that were solid wood, and they didn't have as good of glues and everything. I think that's when dovetails really came about, because they're wider at the end, so when you pull on the front of that drawer, just the way that joint works, it pulls the whole drawer without pulling that joint apart. So I think that's kind of where they sort of started from. you know Nowadays, I'd say they're less critical, as far as you don't necessarily need a dovetail for the strength of the drawer, but when somebody sees dovetails, they think that's true craftsmanship. So that's why I like to do dovetails. That's why I like to have students do dovetails. So this drawer here, this is solid. It's hickory, but a lot of times I use plywood, which I use. It's like 5/8 Baltic birch is what I use. It's not like a traditional plywood. It's real. I don't know what to say. It doesn't have a lot of voids and stuff in it. It's a pretty good plywood for this purpose. But I mean, it's kind of expensive nowadays. It used to be far cheaper. Nowadays, it's really not any cheaper to build it with the Baltic birch versus solid wood as far as materials go. But the labor, it's a lot easier just to cut a bunch of these out with a table saw than it is to glue up a bunch of wood for your wide ones, and then surface it all down and sand it and all that stuff. So as far as labor goes, it's faster and cheaper, but as far as material goes, it's not really any cheaper. So my big goal here today is to show you how to set this thing up and how to run it. That's my big goal. So in order to do dovetails, you kind of have to familiarize yourself with the jig that you're using. Sometimes they take a specific guide. Sometimes they take a specific dovetail router bit. It's not like you can just throw any old dovetail bit in and it'll work with any old jig. So the initial setup and everything of it takes a little while to really tune in. But basically, once you have it tuned in, as long as you don't change it, as long as you don't change a lot of things, it's pretty easy to do. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. Like this bit, once I have that bit set up where I want it, I try not to ever change it unless I need to replace the bit. I will tell you one thing: that plywood is it's a lot harder on the bit. Like this bit will probably be done after I do this stack, but solid wood actually mills a lot easier. So okay, I'll take you through this a little bit. So when you start, you need to identify which pieces are your sides and which pieces are your front and your back. Your front and your back is going to be whatever the real width of your drawer is. So if I'm making a 15-inch wide drawer, then my front and my back are going to be 15 inches. The sides, you have to do a little mathematics on, because let's say I want a 15-inch long drawer. Just the way this comes together, I have to account for, so if I want this to be 15 inches from here to here, I have to account for the wood that's left over after my dovetail. Okay, so once again, that's going to be a little bit determined by your thickness of your wood. But if you're doing pretty consistent sized dovetails every time, then once you have that figured, it's pretty easy, really. So I think for mine, it's somewhere, you would subtract somewhere around a half an inch, maybe even up to 9/16 of an inch. So if I need a 15-inch drawer, that would make my side 14 and a half, maybe 14 and 7/16. Of course, it's going to depend on the thickness that you're doing, but you've got to know that. Okay, so got to identify my sides. Okay, so I've got the sides and the front and the backs, and they're very close to the same width. I don't want to get them mixed up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to label these. That way I know which ones go where. So these are the front and the backs. I'm just going to write an F on here for front. Okay. These are the sides. So I'll write an S on here for side. Good. Okay. The other thing we need to look at is we need to establish a bottom, because the way the dovetail works, you have to have one. This might not be 100% centered, I guess. Let me show you my example. The dovetail might not be 100% centered in that. Now I try and plan it out so it doesn't end on a tail, it ends on the end. Otherwise it doesn't look very good up here. And so on my jig, what I do is I have to end on a quarter, like 4 1/4, 5 1/4, 6 1/4. Anyway, but it might not be 100% centered, so I have to establish which one's my bottom, and I use the bottom as the reference. So I will take a look at all my pieces, and I kind of look what I think is the best edge, and I put the best edge up. Okay. The other thing I look at is I look at the front and the backs, because think about the front of your drawer. You're not going to see it because you're going to have a drawer front on there. And so if I have something bad, I put that to the outside. I put my dado for the bottom on the inside. So the sides, they're not as forgiving. I don't know. I don't know which side you should put in. I mean, when you think about a drawer, you hardly ever look at the outside of the drawer. But at the same time, once it's full of junk, you're not going to see the inside very much. So I don't have a good answer on that. But the other thing, so I look at the top and I pick a good edge for the top, whichever I think is good. I've got some burns on here from sawing that, but it'll clean up pretty good. So I think that's going to be my best edge. And then the side, it doesn't really matter unless there's something I'm really trying to hide. So then I'll just put an X on which side I want to be the bottom. One of these is not the same. It's this one. This one. Oh, I had a label on there. Okay. Okay. Okay, so once I have that done, now pretty much they're ready to go. And I've already tweaked this and messed with it and got it set up, so I feel like it's cutting just the way I want it to. So right now I'm just showing you how to set it up in here. So what I like to do is, oh, this one's already ready to go. Oh, well, I'll do this one first. This is my side. That's the side that the pins are going to get cut on. And so I have my bottom marked here. So the bottom's going to be out towards me, and the bottom's going to be on one side or on the other side. The bottom will never be in the middle. So if I'm doing this end, bottom's going to be over here. If I'm doing this end, the bottom's going to be slid over here. Okay. So I put my side in up to the template. Okay. And then this is my front and the back. I've already done one side. Okay, so then same thing. I got my X up and I've got my X close to the end. So I'm going to slide that in. There's a little metal tab, I would call it, a little metal tab that I've got to push it up against. Both of them need to be pushed up against that. And that tab is what offsets it the right distance to make your dovetails work. So I'm going to butt that up there. Then this corner here doesn't get, there's no wood behind it. So if I don't do something extra, it's going to chip out real bad when I router that. And so what I do is I take another scrap piece of the same size material and I put that scrap piece behind there. So that way when I'm routering that last little bit, it's got something to keep it from blowing out on the backside. So I've got that tight, good. Lock that thing in. And now I have to make sure that this is flush, because it's not always flush. So I have to tweak this front piece just a little bit and make sure that's flush. And while I'm pushing it up, I'm also pushing it over against that tab. I'm going to show you this twice. I know it's redundant, but I want you to get it. So that's flush, that's flush. I'm pushing it that way at the same time. Okay, so now it's locked in. Now it's ready to go. I can adjust these knobs to make it hold down if my material's a little thicker or thinner. But this thing's what actually does it's got a little cam on it. That's what actually locks it down in. But I can adjust, if it's loose, then I adjust those and then I tighten it back up. Okay, so on the router, I'm not too concerned about screwing these pieces up. I mean, I'd rather not screw them up, but if I do, that's not a big deal. But this jig, I don't want to screw it up. And the way to screw it up is to hit it with the router bit. So as long as I keep the router flat on here when it's spinning, I won't screw it up. I mean, I might accidentally cut into my jig over here, but it doesn't matter over there. That's not important. This template here is what's important. So what I do not want to do is pick it up while the bit's spinning. All right. So I'm going to make 2 passes along here. 1, 2, and those passes need to be right to left. I got to go right to left, and then I'm going to come back and go right to left again. And what that's going to do is make a good clean cut on what will end up being this inside corner. If I don't do that, if I don't make those 2 passes, then when I start routering left to right, the bit's spinning this way, and it's just going to chip that wood out. And especially on this plywood, it'll chip it way out. I'll show you that here in a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it'll blow it way down. So I'm going to go right to left, come back, right to left, and I can keep it on while I'm moving. I'm just going to have it be sliding along here. I'm not going to pick it up. Okay. And then I'm going to start plunging left to right. So I'm going to plunge, and I'm basically just tracing this template with the little guide that's on here. Okay, so I'm going to trace that whole thing, get to the end, start it off, wait for it to stop, and then I can get rid of it and see how I did. And when I'm done, I like to double check it visually, make sure I hit all those spots before I take it out. That way it's be real easy to go back and hit it if I need to. All right, okay, here we go. Oh yes, so that's done. Then if I was going to do my other side, which I'm already done with the other side, I would just take this thing out and flip it over, and then I would butt it up now on the left side. Okay, and then I do the same thing with this. Take it and spin it around, butt it up on the left side. But I've already done this. So this is set a little snug, which I like. I like it to be a little snug. I don't want it just to slip right in there. Okay, so this is the one I just did. As long as those bottoms are on the same side, that should go together pretty well. And in theory, it should be lined up on the bottom and on the top, or at least on the bottom, since that was my reference point. Like if these aren't the same width, they wouldn't. And I like to cut them a little snug, so you got to give them a pretty good tap to get them down seated in there. You can actually router these in too deep, and that's in relationship to where your template is. Let me show you that. All right, when you pound that drawer together, if your sides are going way too far into your front and your back, then the template is lined up too back. It's allowing you to cut too far in, And so this thing just needs scooted out this way. Once again, that's something we'll adjust when we get it set it up the first time. And then after that, you really don't have to adjust it. So I actually like to set mine just a hair deeper because I don't want to have to deal with that piece sticking out too far. And so I'll just control how far I tap it in, but I do cut them just a hair deeper. So now I guess what I'd like to do is just set that up again. It'll walk you through it one more time, and hopefully we've got it. Okay, so this piece here, it has an F on it. So that tells me this is a front and a back, or front or a back. So if I'm doing this side, I have the X over here, but I'll do this side since I didn't do it last time. So I'm just going to slide this thing over. I'm going to slip that in temporarily, but I'm not going to lock it in or anything. And now I'm going to grab one of my sides. So I want the X to the outside and the X where I can see it. So I'll slide that beauty in. And you see this little black tab here? That's what I'm butting it up against. So it's offset. That way my router's offset. So I'm going to slide that up against the black tab, lock it in. Now I'm going to push what would be the front up against this side. And I'm going to make sure I'm on this black tab. This is a little snug getting it in here. So I'm just going to loosen that. I'm going to open it up one time and then make sure it's tight. Okay, so it's tight that way. Tight against my front. Before I lock it down, I'm going to put my little scrap piece over here. I've got that locked in. I'm going to lock it down. Here we go. Boom, locked down. Now I'm going to go back and double check and make sure this is flush. So now I can raise this just a smidgen. Still making sure that it's against that black tab. Lock that thing in, and now I'm ready to go. So I'll make 2 passes on here first. Okay, now you don't have to shut it off after those 2 passes, but I just want to show you what that looks like. And then I'll show you what happens if you don't do that. Okay, now I'm ready to start plunging. So I'm going to plunge left to right. You can't really see what you're doing, so you kind of have to use the force and just kind of feel it out a little bit. Okay, got that one done. Take this guy out. Give it the old flipperooski. Put it up against that black tab on this side. Take the front out. Bend it around here. Up against the tab. Tight to this. Tight to this. Move my little scrap over. Lock that baby in. Okay, now make sure we're flush here. I'm going to tweak it just a tad. That's pretty good. Pretty good. All right, same thing. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there it is. So before I glue this drawer together, I'll cut my dado for my bottom, and then I'll go ahead and sand all the inside pieces. That'd be the side with the dado. So I'll cut my dado in here. I'll sand all these, and then after the drawer's glued together, then I'll sand the outside. All right, I'm going to set one more up and show you what happens when you don't make that initial cut. Show you what that looks like. And I tell you what, I'll give you a 2-for-1 here. I'll show you what it does if you don't have this other board behind it. Actually, I'm going to do 3 things here. I'm going to not line these up against the tab, and I'm going to show you what that does. Okay? So I'm going to do 3 things wrong. I'm not going to put a board behind here. I'm not going to make this first pass from right to left, and I'm not going to have these lined up, and I'll show you what it does. All right, now I didn't mean to, but I actually did 4 things here. Okay, number 1, you see the way this splintered down real bad? That's because I didn't make that first pass. That's what that prevents. Okay, number 2, you see this chipped out real bad on the back side. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, it does that sometimes. It just does. But having that little board right there, that helps a lot, okay? So that's the second thing. The third thing is I didn't have them lined up on my tabs, on my black tabs there. So when I go to put this thing together, look at this. They don't line up. They're not the same. They don't line up height-wise. So when I go to cut my dado in there, my bottom's not going to line up. It's going to be a mess. And then the third thing, or the fourth thing, I guess, it's the fourth thing I wanted to show you is if you end on one of these, if you end on a tail, it gets routed in the top and it doesn't look very good. Now it's hard to tell on this one because I offset them, so whatever, but anyway. Okay. So don't do it that way. Do it the other way. That's pretty much it.